Our whole idea was to prove it was, as I said earlier, safe and reliable, productive, and actually proved out by the maximum possible test. So that was our goal.
On January 23, 1960, Don Walsh and Jacques Piccard made a record-breaking dive to the bottom of the Challenger Deep in the bathyscaphe Trieste. This dive was only one in a series of deep-sea dives conducted in the late 1950s and early 1960s by the United States Navy. The submersions were known as Project Nekton. Over the duration of Project Nekton, the crew encountered many issues with the experimental craft that had never been faced before due to the fact that they were the first to attempt such a deep and monumental dive. Cultures had to mesh, and money and knowledge had to be exchanged between peoples to make these dives a reality. And yet, over half a century later, the impressive feats of the Trieste and his crew remain unscathed. On August 1, 1954, Swiss physicist and inventor Auguste Piccard launched a phenomenal deep-sea submersible that would one day reach the deepest point in the world's ocean. The bathyscaphe was given the name the Trieste after the city in which it was constructed, Trieste, Italy. Auguste Piccard made his vision a reality with the help of his son, Jacques Piccard. Exchanges were also made with many Italian and Swiss sponsors to afford the costs of building the Trieste. Once it was built, it worked like a gargantuan underwater balloon. It had a large metal shell with spherical cabin attached for the crew. There were ballast containers on the submersible that were filled with approximately 11 tons of shot, which would weigh the bathyscaphe down so it could descend into the deep blue. Although simple in design, the bathyscaphe cost a great deal of money to maintain. For this reason, the Piccards decided to sell the Trieste. They made the exchange with the United States Navy at a cost of $250,000.
Do all these sample dives, and at the end of the dive program, they gave a final report to the Office of Naval Research and said, yes, I think the U.S. Navy ought to buy this because it could be a very useful platform for marine scientists.
The Trieste joined the United States Navy in January of 1958. The Navy wanted to make a series of deep dives and eventually explore the greatest depth of the planet, the bottom of the Challenger Deep. The Navy titled this substantial operation Project Nekton. The Trieste was transported to San Diego, California in the fall of 1958, where test dives and modifications would be made to prepare the bathyscaphe for deeper dives. During this time, an international crew was curated. Some members including Jacques Piccard and Lieutenant Don Walsh, who would initially be making the deepest dive. Crew of Project Nekton assembled, the test dives began. In the early months of 1959, the Trieste went on multiple test dives exploring the San Diego Trough. The crew of Project Nekton made exchanges with the Naval Electronics Lab to plan out what alterations had to be made to the Trieste to enable it to reach greater depths. Deep-sea exploration was a new concept in the 1960s, so the crew and engineers at the Naval Electronics Lab had to invent their own solutions to their problems and therefore explore unknown territories of scientific knowledge. They made history with their inventions, which would be used long after Project Nekton.
I would like to go all the way someday.
How far is all?
35,150 feet.
And the bathyscaphe take somebody down that far, Jacques? Where's that kid going?
In its initial form, the Trieste could only reach a depth of approximately 20,000 feet. In order to make this depth greater, the submersible was fabricated with a new cabin. Exchanges were made with Krupp Ironworks of Essen, West Germany, to accommodate this feature. The Trieste also needed larger balloons and bigger ballast containers. The upgraded Trieste was finally ready to encounter deeper waters. Apra Harbor, Guam would be the new location of Project Nekton. On October 5, 1959, the Trieste was secured onto a commercial cargo ship and its journey to Guam began. As soon as it was reassembled in Guam, the test dives commenced. The bathyscaphe continued to encounter new depths, and with this came new complications to be sorted out. During one of the deepest test dives, the glue to the cabin of the Trieste failed due to the expansion of the metal after surfacing from the cold seawater into the warm air. As a solution, Chief Petty Officer John Michel coordinated the pieces of the sphere back together using a forklift, then wrapped steel rings around the outside of the cabin to hold it together. The Trieste was conclusively prepared to embark on its deepest dive yet. On January 19th, 1960, the USS Wandonk towing ship commenced the 200-mile tow of the Trieste out to the Challenger Deep from Apra Harbor. It took 4 days for the vessel to reach the waters above the diving site. January 23, 1960, would be the date of man's deepest dive in history. The waves were an astounding 20 feet high on this historical date, which induced great difficulties in boarding the Trieste. Lieutenant Don Walsh and Jacques Picard were secured away in the bathyscaphe and on their way to the bottom of the Challenger Deep by 8:30 a.m. The descent into the blue was running smoothly until about 31,000 feet. At that depth, the crew heard a loud bang that was low in pitch. The bathynauts hastily checked the scientific instruments of the submersible to see if the noise had affected the Trieste. The readings showed that the bathyscaphe was still functioning like normal, so Lieutenant Walsh and Picard bravely continued their descent. Every second, more shot was being released from the Trieste to slow its descent and ready it for impact with the seafloor. When the Trieste made final touchdown, the depth gauge read 37,800 feet. The real depth was later determined to be an astonishing 35,840 feet. Jacques Picard and Lieutenant Don Walsh had successfully reached the deepest point in the world's ocean and been the first to do it. They shared a firm handshake in celebration of their prodigious accomplishment. They then discovered that the loud bang they heard at 31,000 feet was the sound of the glass on the back entrance tube cracking. This tube is filled with water anyways, which is why the crack did not cause any difficulties in the journey. In order to make it back to the surface in daylight, the Trieste would have to leave after just 20 minutes of exploring the bottom of the world's ocean.
Shall we go up? Do we have to? It's time. We have to go now, you know? Oh, okay. We have to go now.
At 1:00 p.m., the Trieste began its 3.5-hour ascent to the surface. Upon reaching sea level, they were greeted by the cheers of their fellow crew. After marveling over their achievements, the crew of Project Nekton hitched the Trieste to the USS Wandonk, and the tow back to Apra Harbor initiated, marking the end of Project Nekton and the beginning of deep-sea discovery history. In the aftermath of Project Nekton, the Trieste and its crew received recognition of their achievements. Jacques Picard and Lieutenant Don Walsh were honored by President Dwight Eisenhower at the White House with medals for their accomplishments in deep-sea exploration. Then, in 1972, Jacques Picard received the Howard N. Potts Medal for his contributions in science and engineering. Jacques Picard continued to use his innovative mind to design and build manned submersibles. However, he died on November 1, 2008, at the age of 86 before building all of his planned designs. As for Don Walsh, in 2010 he was awarded with the Distinguished Public Service Medal by the United States Navy. Also in 2010, Don Walsh was presented with the Hubbard Medal by the National Geographic Society for his exploration of the planet's greatest depths. Don Walsh is still alive and has continued to use his background in oceanography in his daily life. As for the Trieste, it was eventually retired to the Navy Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Project Nekton left a lasting impact on the history of deep-sea exploration. When the Trieste encountered the deepest depth of the world's ocean, it set a record that is yet to be beat by any manned submersible to this day. However, after Project Nekton, over 200 deep-sea submersibles were built. The unmanned deep submersible, Kaiko, made the journey to the bottom of the Challenger Deep in 1995. This was followed by the unmanned submersible, Nereus, travels to the deepest point in the world's ocean in 2009. The only manned mission to this depth occurred on March 26, 2012, and was performed by Australian film director James Cameron. He dove to 35,756 feet, just a few feet short of the Trieste in his manned submersible, the Deep Sea Challenger. Histories collided on this expedition when Don Walsh became a consultant for the mission. As Walsh revisited old memories, he got to first-hand experience how Project Nekton has truly inspired future generations to explore the great unknown.